Welcome to Real Chat with Kat, the podcast that's all about real conversations for real transformation. I'm your host, Kat Polsinelli, professional speaker, MC, and best-selling international author. Here, we tackle the tough stuff, the mud that we all have found ourselves in. We talk about the pivots, the challenges, and the victories that shape our lives and our businesses. From overcoming trauma and finding your voice to navigating life's unexpected twists, we get raw, honest, and open. You'll hear from inspiring guests who share their stories of resilience, healing, and growth. Whether it's breaking through emotional abuse, embracing self-worth, or thriving in entrepreneurship, you'll find connection, empowerment, and the tools to keep you moving forward. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and get ready for stories that hit home and conversations that make a difference. Let's get real together. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Real Chat with Kat. So excited to have you here with me today. I have a wonderful guest. I'm actually super excited to dive into all of the things. I think we've had a really interesting theme this year already of mission-driven people that have been on the podcast that have been sharing not only the things they've been through, but where they're at and how much of a shift they had to make with their own mindset. I feel like the theme this year keeps coming back to us, keeps coming back to you as the individual. So I'm super excited to talk with Dana today and have this conversation. So welcome to the podcast.
All right. My name is Dana Diaz. Thank you for having me. I always describe myself as a truth seer and a truth teller because I was, since I was a child, growing up in an abusive household. And then that led me, unfortunately, despite what I felt and what I saw and what I knew, it led me into a 25-year relationship with my abusive ex-husband. But where I am now is kind of, it all came full circle that I have written a memoir trilogy, an award-winning best-selling memoir trilogy, and I contribute to magazines and I speak globally and I do podcasting and all these things because I think it's really important for men and women to understand what abuse really is and what it looks like from the outside versus just on the inside. Because it doesn't come off as it truly is. And so I want people to be aware of it because it is so prevalent and it happens right under our nose. But I'm dedicated to that. And of course, I am also, the mom, the wife, all of those roles, but those are not who I am by definition. I think who I am is always going to be the truth teller and the truth seer. And so that's really my core value and what's important to me.
I love that. And I know, you and I have some similarities in the things that we've been through, and where it's kind of taken us on our journey. And I do find it interesting that we don't have those conversations out loud as much as we need to, right? I know that we kind of chatted about this before, but it's really interesting to me to see how many times I've talked with someone that I find out has been in some form of abuse, and yet they keep it to themselves because they feel like they're the only person that's going through it. It's really interesting to me, especially like in the day and age that we are in now, right? With all the technology and able to Google and look up absolutely everything. And yet this still feels like it's something that doesn't happen very often. And so people that go through it tend to go through it ultimately alone, and they go through this healing journey alone as well. And it takes a long time, I feel like, for a lot of us. And I was one of them to like really recognize and be around people that have been through those similar situations and be like, oh, wait, you have felt this way too, or oh, you experienced that too. And being able to see that like there's really a pattern that goes on inside of these situations. And again, how common it actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people forget, and I'm going to get a lot of heck for this, but you know, I think anybody that abuses another person or is violent is a malignant narcissist. I mean, there are narcissists that are not bad people, but the malignant narcissists are the abusers all day long, every day, No arguments as far as I'm concerned. And you have to remember that narcissism 101 is isolation. And that's exactly what happened to me. They keep you away from your friends, they separate you from your family. In my case, he moved me out of the big city of Chicago, where I was born and raised, and moved me to this podunk farm town. He didn't like me reading books because the influence. He didn't like me being on the internet because it was taking time away from him. I didn't even have a smartphone until after our divorce in 2021. I mean, let's be real. That is ridiculous because God forbid I had the internet at my fingertips. So I didn't even know that other people were experiencing the things I was experiencing until I listened to my very first podcast. And I'm very sad that I don't remember the name of it, but I just remember hearing a woman tell her story. And I mean, every word that came out of her mouth, I said, me too, me too. Oh my gosh. I went through that. They
Mm,
did that to me. And yes, and I had the childhood that backed it up. And not everybody that ends up in an abusive relationship had the childhood that basically primed them for that. But I think in more cases than not, actually, it's the basis of my platform now, is that it is your identity. Whatever it is that you were made to believe about yourself is what leads you into these things. And I think that's where we have problems sometimes, where we struggle to heal because we're made to believe that the other people are bad and it's about the justice, but nobody ever says, yeah, but what about you? And for you to take that accountability, not that you put yourself in that situation, not that you deserved it, but guess
hmm
what? You're the one that has to deal with it. And there is no amount of finger pointing and blaming that's going to change what you believe about yourself, because somewhere in the mix of that, you are believing that you're not good enough, that you don't deserve better, all those worthiness issues. And that's the core of the healing. And you cannot do yoga with goats or do positive affirmations. Like you need healing is such a different experience for everybody, but it goes through so many layers of eventually having to get back to the identity of who you are without all those labels put on you.
And the layers definitely that is definitely something that we don't talk about enough. And like you said, it's not that you have to grow up in that situation to experience it, right? Mine was actually the opposite. I had a really great childhood. I was the oldest of two girls. We got to do a lot of things. My family was a little bit stricter in my upbringing, so there was more of the things that people are talking about online now, of like you're supposed to strive always, and if you fail, that's not an option, and I'm supposed to be the strong one. So there were all of those identities that were tied with it as well, which is also one of the reasons why I think I stayed in mine for 10 years, because I didn't want to go back and I didn't know how to have the conversation, and I expected to be shamed or I told you so, for it. The other piece of it that people don't talk about as well is, sometimes we do reach out for help, but unfortunately that help isn't in the correct space, right? One of the things that I talk about very prominently, especially with law enforcement, is I did actually reach out for help. I went to my ex's mother and I started telling her, like, these are some of the things that are happening. These are some of the things that he's constantly saying. These are the things that are going on at home. What I wasn't aware of is that she had had abusive relationships prior to the man she was with at that time that I knew. So for her, it was totally normal. And so the response that I got was, oh, well, sometimes guys just don't understand and they just need a little bit more love. And I was actually given a book on how to be a better wife. So it's like there are times, isn't that crazy? So there are times when it's like people do actually seek someone or ask for help. But if that person isn't ready to hear them, or like in my situation, she was around that most of her relationship. So it wasn't a big deal. Like that was normal to her. His mentality and what he was doing was actually validated, which then even deeper encrusts like, okay, well, then what am I doing wrong? It always ends up coming back to that individual, right? What am I doing wrong? What could I be doing better? How could I be doing something in this direction? Which, I also understand is a part of your work as well. When you get talking about the subconscious belief and understanding that it is so deep rooted in the way that we see ourselves and how that affects the decisions that we make on a regular basis.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's basic neuroscience that your core beliefs about yourself are developed by the time you're the age of 7. And if you think about that, that's second or third grade. That is a very small child who now has some idea about what their gender role is, what the expectations of them are societally. You have culture, the media, authority figures, all these people basically. I call it, we say we mindlessly follow the herd. It's because, yes, they are herding you into your field saying this is what you're supposed to do, and what you're supposed to be. If you have this appendage, this is what your role is in life. And if you don't have it, then you're over here and you got to cook and clean and do that. And we can't dismiss, going back to part of what you said, we're Gen X. I'm assuming you're Gen X, or maybe you're a millennial, but we millennials and Gen X were raised by baby boomers and older. And we have
Mm-hmm.
to remember that until my generation, Gen X, that was the stereotypical role of a man, was to make the money, do those things, be the income provider. Women couldn't even have a checkbook, couldn't even have a bank account till I was a kid. You couldn't get an education, you couldn't go to school. So it's interesting that, whatever you want to call it, narcissism, abuse, we don't see that word really come up until the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, maybe. We don't
Mm-hmm.
see much attention to domestic violence. Even I was in college in 1994 when the Violence Against Women's Act came out, which finally said that, oh, you can call the authorities and tell them that your husband is beating the crap out of you. I mean, that blows my mind that before that, it was societally and criminally acceptable for
Yeah.
domestic things to happen without any intervention or help. So when you talk about why don't women get help, because what's the first thing that happens? I mean, I know when I came out with my first book, and then all the podcasts, I even had podcast hosts and people on lives that were coming in saying, well, how come you stayed so long? It couldn't have been that bad if you stayed 25 years. Well, oh, I don't know why he treated me that way for 25 years. Why he thought he was entitled to do to me the things that he did to me,
Mm-hmm.
because I was terrified. How about that? I was terrified when weapons, guns, and knives are being used basically as and I always say it's like having an invisible collar around your neck, like you put on a dog. It keeps you in line when things are being used as threats, if you this or if you that. But when we look generationally, we cannot dismiss that factor that men, and I'm not picking on men because I know that they are also victims of abuse and domestic violence, but more of it is perpetrated onto women. And that's just a statistical fact. And men historically have had the upper hand in every aspect of life, personally, criminally, judicially, because I too, and we talked about that, when I finally did open my mouth after 25 years, when he finally brought a gun, and I thought I was going to die that night, the police came, but they did not arrest him. They wanted proof. You want proof? I had my neighbors that heard the gunshots and the yelling before that. I have ring cameras, but that wasn't proof enough. And not only that, he was trespassing on my property. That house was in my name. I was the only one on the title and deed. They didn't even remove him from my property in the middle of the night, and he's got a gun and he's drunk. I was told to maybe get some security cameras so I have better proof, better evidence that I can bring in court next time. And, that makes me really sad because, my dad is a retired Chicago cop. And when all of this was happening, talk about being helpless. And this was not the dad that raised me, by the way. This is my biological father. I was abused by my stepfather terribly. But my dad said more of the time than not in his career as a Chicago cop, most homicides started out as domestic violence situations.
Mm-hmm.
And in some of those cases, the victim did call at some point, and usually didn't call after that because they either suffered the consequences at home or nothing was done to help the victim. And when he was watching this happen to me and watching me go to court, 3 times I had to go to court just to get an order of protection and it took me 3 times to get approved for one, which I didn't think, that seemed dumb after a knife and a gun was brought into the situation and my child was involved in one of those situations. But I finally got an order of protection, and it was for him to stay 10 feet away from me.
Oh,
And for
wow.
people that don't know me, at the time I was 93 skeletal pounds. I'm 5'3". He could have thrown a 2x4 at me from 10 feet away and hurt me pretty badly. And,
Hmm.
somebody that he had not just used guns, he had used his vehicle in threatening ways and caused damage. And not just to me, to other people. He had also shot the neighbor's dog. And that was, this is not somebody that just was, Mr. Perfect. Although, I always remind people, look at Ted Bundy, the serial killer. He was charming and handsome. Nobody had any idea he was like maiming women after he raped them. But oh,
Hmm.
he wouldn't do that. You always see on the news, they were a nice neighbor. I never heard a peep. Well, of course they were. They were walking the straight and narrow, so you wouldn't suspect this. So honestly, the whole thing is very frustrating for those of us that never really got the justice we were given. But I do believe that the power that we have is within ourselves. It's in reminding ourselves who we are, and going into that identity and coming back stronger and more powerful than ever. And no, none of us ever asked to be strong. We never asked to be brave and resilient, but you can choose to be. And once you get to the core of your subconscious beliefs and figure out, okay, this is how Dana ended up in this situation, because she didn't feel, on a very basic level, she didn't feel worthy of better.
Hmm.
Well, now I know what I'm worthy of. As a matter of fact, I bought myself a tiara. I've got a crown sitting right here
I
next to my
love it.
desk. For real, because you know what? You got it. Fake it till you make it, whatever you want to call it. But you have to feel, another person in the same situation would have never even gone on a date with my ex, but I did, because I thought he might be the only person that would ever ask. I did not have the belief that I deserved better, or that I should wait. I was okay with settling because that's what I was taught in my childhood. So I think that that is absolutely what we have to deal with, is these core subconscious beliefs. It's the key to basically unlocking everything in life: your healing, your happiness, your health, your wealth, if that's what you want. I don't know who wouldn't, but whatever it is, we can get whatever we want in life, regardless of our past, if we just get to the core of who we are as a person and choose that.
Yeah. And I want to come back to this into your story, and thank you so much, Dana, for
Yeah.
sharing that information, because it is hard. And I know that there are some people that are probably squirming a little bit and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is making me really uncomfortable." But that's kind of the point, right? Because you don't see change if we don't make people uncomfortable. If we're always
Yes.
comfortable, people are like, "Oh, then it's not that big of a deal, so we should be fine," and they move on, right?
Yeah.
So I need you guys to, as an audience, to understand that this isn't meant to scare you, but it's meant to let you know that this is a bigger issue than what people understand. And there is still across the board a huge realm of domestic violence that is happening that doesn't have the physical proof, that doesn't have the bruises, right? That cannot be shown. And unfortunately, there are people that are still paying with their lives for this. I had a statistic I was actually looking at a couple days ago, and it was talking about police reports and the calls that come in. And just in the United States, we are anywhere between 15 and 55% of law enforcement calls being domestic violence related.
Wow.
There are 12 million men and women in the United States that have said that they have gone through some form of domestic abuse, sexual or stalking every year. 12 million people.
Wow.
And this is the reason why this conversation is so important. And also understanding that you may have never experienced abuse, and we don't ever want you to. And maybe you've experienced addiction. Maybe you've had to deal with homelessness. Maybe you've had to pull yourself out of the ground because you had an absolute terrible childhood. The point of this conversation is understanding that bad things do sometimes happen to great people, but there is the opportunity for us to be able to choose, right? And then you have this quote that's on your website that I think this beautifully wraps in. It says, "It's not about what broke you, it's about the mindset that rebuilds you." And I love this because we don't understand that there is a choice that we get to choose to shift our perspectives, to shift the way that we think, to shift who it is that we are now and who we want to be. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that as well, about the power of the subconscious and how you use that in your realm of coming out of that. Because even coming out of something like that, right, there's all these pieces and components that are still floating around even after things have been separated. Let's just say things have settled down. We won't even go into some of the stuff that happens after you leave. But how do you start to rebuild? How do you begin to say, okay, well, I feel completely effed up, right? Sure. I'm sure that some of it is
Yeah.
probably my subconscious. What the hell does that even mean? Where do I even begin? What would you say to people?
Yeah, I always tell people it goes back to how your subconscious programming was established, and that's through repetition. People don't realize, and this is like the premise of when I give talks is it only takes hearing or seeing or being exposed to something as little as 2 to 7 times for your brain to start to believe it as a truth. And so when you
Wow.
think about maybe how your parents spoke to you, what they called you, it could have been the kid Billy in your third grade class told you had big ears, whatever it was that, I'm making light, but whatever it was that really stuck with you and resonated. And the media, it's called the illusory truth, but the media thrives on that. They love putting things out, and the more you see it, the more you believe it. And people, I mean, look at our, we won't get into the way the country is divided, but everybody thinks they're right,
Yeah.
right? But what's important is how that affects what we believe about ourselves. Because if your parents tell you, so in my house growing up, I'll just throw myself out as an example. I was literally told on almost a daily basis by my stepfather that he shouldn't have to pay for me, that my mother never loved me, and that I shouldn't have even ever been born. I heard my mother call me an accident and a mistake. So when you hear these things enough, and then I was experiencing physical abuse on top of it, what am I supposed to think? Yes, eventually I absorbed all that. So the repetition creates the belief. It's basic neuroscience. So you have to identify when you're grown and ready to deal with these things, you need to identify what those core subconscious beliefs are. And I've set up programs on my site where it can help you do that. And then you basically audit your language. You have to
Mm,
kind of tune out the news and the mom and the dad and the siblings and the friends and the gossipy neighbors and all the people, and you choose. This is your first choice point. That, in my head, I think we all have these replay loops. So the usual one, which, it was the same one playing in my head, is you're not, I hate to use this crazy thing, but you're not enough. Nobody ever wanted you. You're never going to be good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not skinny enough, whatever the not enough is.
mm-hmm.
I had to start reframing that and saying, no, there's actually enough evidence in the world to prove that I am. Like, they don't like me and they think I'm worthless and should never been born, but these people think I'm the greatest thing that ever was. And this is another neuroscientific tip, is that your brain has this part of it called the reticular activating system. And we love the reticular activating system, not so much. I call it a bouncer because it's like the bouncer at the nightclub. So, to give you some perspective, you are exposed to roughly 11 million stimuli every single day between what you
It's
see, what you
crazy.
hear, what you encounter. Okay, 11 million. So, your reticular activating system, you want to know what it lets into your brain? 24, 2 dozen of those 11 million every single day of your life. So, yes, it's like a bouncer at the club. But if you think about a bouncer at the club, who does the bouncer usually let in first? The regulars, right? People he knows, because, and your brain's the
Mm,
same, whatever is familiar. So if that thing that you see or hear conforms to that idea that, oh, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, now here's another piece of evidence. It's like putting it in the files. Say, see, you're not enough, you're not enough, we're going to keep showing you you're not enough. When you start to turn that around and say, nope, I'm not cool with that, like, over here, this is why I have the tiara. Over here, I've got the tiara. I am the queen of everything. I am owning my land, and we have love and light and all the good stuff, unicorns flying over rainbows here. Now my reticular activating system is focused on, oh, look at her with a shiny, sparkly crown on. She's the queen of everything. Now we're going to see all the things and notice. We're going to become more familiar and open our mind up to those possibilities. And so I always tell people, whatever it is you think you know about yourself or you know about even somebody else, there are 10,999,976 other data points every single day that can possibly prove a completely different reality, a completely different truth about who you are, who they are, what your life can be. And I joke about this, but honestly, your reticular activating system does not give a crap if you're happy, if you're successful, if you're in an abusive marriage, if you're in a situation where your life is being threatened. It doesn't care. If it is familiar, it is going to keep you in that situation until you choose. I'm not saying to walk out, because it's not always safe to just up and walk out, but you can choose not to believe that you deserve that, you or to believe that
Hmm.
you deserve better is what I'm trying to say. I'm getting my words mixed, but it all goes back to you have power over your brain. That is called neuroplasticity. And neuroscience is complex, but it's really not, because once we harness the power of it on a very basic level, our world can completely change. And I say this as personal proof because I will never forget, and I talk about this in my first memoir, which was about that marriage. After 24 years and some months, I became very, very ill. I became autoimmune, rare lung disease, all because of the high stress, as the doctors called it, that I was living in. But I finally asked myself a question nobody had ever asked me before. I asked, what do I want? Because it sure wasn't that. And
Mm.
I knew right away we all have things in our hearts and on our minds that we've always, desired to have. And for me, it was basic. I just wanted to be married to somebody that, didn't want me dead. Maybe they loved me. That would be nice. And I wanted to write. I had a degree in journalism, basic things. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And that again is the reticular activating system. When you focus on something, because I couldn't get that out of my head. I was like, you know what? I do want that. And I can still have that. It's never too late. And within 2.5 years of divorcing him, I became a best-selling and award-winning author of not just one book, of 3 books. And I'm remarried to somebody who I've known his family over 20 years, but he was right in front of me the whole time. But it was like, oh, there you are. I didn't see you before because I had blinders on, and I
Yeah.
didn't think I deserved somebody like this. And my life is 1,000,000% different. And it's because I finally opened my eyes to one of those 10,999,976 data points that my brain was choosing to ignore every day. And it sounds very simple and basic. It's not easy, but it can be done.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that you broke down all of the different data points. Like, I love that. I'm gonna have to get that number stuck in my head now. But it's really interesting because it's the same thing for me, right? That was one of the things that I fell in love with was neuroscience, knowing how neuroplasticity works and knowing that we actually can shift what it is connected to and
Yep.
what the belief is, I thought was so cool. And that was for me kind of the starting point of like, okay, it says that this is what you can do. So we're going to test it out, right? And so I would do it with like the smallest things of like driving in the car and being frustrated and thinking everybody was after me and this person couldn't drive and da 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 da, da, right? And I just started, very simply like, okay, maybe they're just having a bad day. Oh, okay, it looks like they probably weren't paying attention, right? So it has nothing to do with me. So it was like
Right.
just retraining, but talking about something different. But it's really interesting how you can use an old set of belief up against a new set of belief and be like, yeah, I choose to believe this one, right? Like it's really interesting. And the same thing, after coming out of my relationship for 10 years, I went into another one that was very egotistical. He wasn't abusive. He just had a lot of trauma that he didn't deal with that we trauma bonded real quick.
Good.
And once I got to a point in the relationship of noticing that things weren't changing, right? My oldest one was about 14 at the time, and I was like, our relationship is falling apart. And I don't think that it's just he's a teenager. I think there's something going on with me. And I
Mm.
started noticing the patterns of, some of the arguments and this and things in my relationship. And it was like, okay, well, then I'm going to take a look at me first. And let's kind of see what's going on. That's where I discovered neuroscience and neuroplasticity. And that was kind of I dug into the rabbit hole and I never came back up. And I'm so glad because
Yeah.
I left that person. I split off to be my own. My kids and I have amazing relationships now. I'm now married to my absolute best friend. We've been together now 7 years in July. But it's really interesting, right? It's like it's the things that you don't see. It's the things that literally your brain distorts and deletes because it's like, well, that doesn't fit the narrative. And like you said, it's not that it's easy. I know it sounds easy, but it's a lot of work. But I think that for me, and I hope that everybody else is getting this as well, is it simply starts with choice, right?
Yeah.
You just got to choose. And I know that choosing sometimes feels like the absolute hardest thing that you could ever do in your life, depending on the situation, but it's the choice. And when you start with that
Yeah.
choice of choosing to believe different or choosing to say, no, I don't agree with that anymore, that's all that it takes. And then you just repeat that and fill
Yeah.
it in with that new belief.
Yeah, and the other part of that is the self-awareness because you have to catch yourself. And I always tell people, it's not about like taking score or anything, but listen to how you feel. Like your example about traffic was perfect because what happens, I always tell people like when you react to something negatively, that's when your self-awareness needs to kick in, where you need to look at what your choices are.
Mm-hmm.
For you it was in traffic saying, well, I could be really pissed right now that this person doesn't know how to drive, but maybe they just got told that they have terminal cancer. You don't know what somebody is going through, and so you were opting for something that gave you a little more peace and a little, giving somebody else grace that, maybe you didn't get yourself. And I found the same thing. And for me, it was even when, it's not like everything was suddenly magical when I got with my husband now. I mean, yes, he's much gentler and he's very gentle and very sweet and everything my ex was not, but I was still here. One of my favorite quotes is wherever you go, there you are. And those unworthiness things kept coming up because I was still healing and thought it a good idea to get with this amazing man. But, here we are. And everything's okay, but it is a choice point. And it is a point where there would be times where I would encounter a situation and I would react in an unproductive and unhealthy way that I was fully aware of because it's what I had always done.
Mm-hmm.
But with this relationship, it was different and I didn't want to ruin it. And I didn't want to act that way because it's not who I was. It's who I had to be before to survive, but it's not who I wanted to be or who I was now. And I didn't have to be that girl anymore. So it was the point of coming to say, like, I remember once literally stopping myself. I was about to have a tantrum and do a whole panic attack and, just self sabotage the whole damn thing, right? And I'm walking down the hall, I always imagine like in Tom and Jerry, Jerry the mouse walking this tiny little thing like on a mission, like yeah. And I stopped halfway down the hall and I said, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to suffer. And why am I wanting to make this man suffer that never did anything to me but love me?
Mm.
I have to love me enough to save us all. So it was that for me was like the first time I had that choice point where I realized, okay, I'm aware of what I'm doing. So now it's time to be a big girl and take responsibility. And do I really want to act like this? Do I really want to suffer? Do I want to make this man suffer? No, let me love us both enough to be grown up and to make a different choice that is uncomfortable and that I don't know the
Yeah.
certainty of the outcome, but it's got to be better than what I know is going to happen if I do this. But again, it goes back to our brain. It tends us towards what's familiar because
Hmm.
I knew exactly what was going to happen if I proceeded, Jerry the mouse going down the hall. I knew exactly how that was going to go down. And it was not going to be good for anybody and none of us were going to be happy. Self-awareness, make a better choice, go down the road never traveled or less traveled, And eventually what stops us is our nervous system, because our nervous system, it's, people talk about their gut feeling. You know what the right thing to do is. You know when something doesn't feel right. You know when the energy is off with a person. You know when you're about to do something you really don't want to do or say that thing. But our nervous system, it likes doing the familiar thing, even if it
Hmm.
is going to sabotage, even if it is going to create chaos, because sometimes that chaos is normal. But again, you can choose different. I choose joy. I choose happy. Am I perfect? No. When I'm sick, when I'm tired, when I'm on the rag, I don't know. I'm perimenopausal. My hormones go all over. Some days it just doesn't happen. And I just look at my husband and say, I love you, but I don't even like you today. So stay the hell away. But on a normal day, when you have those points, you I just always tell people, take the next best step, do the next right thing, whatever that is, but you know what it is and you
Hmm.
can choose it. And if you're saying you can't or you shouldn't, well, we need to talk about that, but that's a whole other show.
See, right? But there is something about, standing in your own mess, right?
Yes.
Even the things that have been thrown on you and saying like, yes, that shouldn't have happened to me. No, I don't agree with it. And I also don't want to be a product of that.
Yes.
Right. And
Yes.
choosing to flip that script. One of the things that I used to say when I first got out of my relationship, was everybody would say like, oh, well, at least you get to start a brand new chapter. And I was like, nope. I was like, we closed that book, we burned it. We're gonna write a whole new book. We're not keeping chapters in the same book. Like, no, thank you. And so that was kind of my thing was to me, I'm like, if you're writing a chapter in a book, it goes along with the story. I'm like, there's always the plot twist and stuff. But I was like, no, screw that. Like, I don't even want that theme anymore. Like, we're burning the
Yeah.
whole thing and we're starting completely over. But you're right, it is scary. It's unnerving because you don't know the outcome and the brain wants to stay safe, right? That's what it is programmed to do. It is programmed to keep us safe. And so if it knows the outcome, that's better than not knowing the outcome, right? But if you think about it, we've been doing things that we didn't know we could do our entire life, from when we decided to walk to riding a bike, learning to swim, right? Like all these things you
Yeah.
didn't know how to do at one
Yes.
point, and you chose to be like, I'm going to do this, right? It's the same thing with our personality, with who it is that we want to be in the world. We just don't think about it that way because that seems big and scary over here, but it's like, but you did it with all these other things. So it's the same thing. It just feels a lot bigger because you're now an adult and there's all these other things that have kind of been shoved in there for you to think about and believe or feel shamed of and judged and all this stuff. When in reality, everybody else is busy doing their own thing, and half the time, nobody has a chance to pay attention to you regardless.
It's true though. And I think that the people who do pay a little too much attention so that they can criticize and judge you, well, they've already decided who you are in their mind, but that doesn't have to be who you decide to be in
Mm,
your mind. And those
absolutely.
probably aren't your people. If they're committed to misunderstanding or disliking you, they're probably not your people, even if they're your family, just saying.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, Dana, we could talk for hours,
Yeah.
especially if we dive into neuroscience, because like that to me was like the most fascinating piece
Yeah.
of all the things. And again, it is based in science. It is something that you guys can follow. It is something you can look up and you can see like, oh, this actually works. I think that for me is what made it a little bit easier than just being like, oh, you should do this and then this is what will happen from
Right.
it. Being able to have that tangible piece to be able to show myself proof was something that was very, very helpful to me. So, and I know that you do a lot of the subconscious work and strategy behind that for people as well. So tell us, how can everybody find you? How can they connect with you? How can they be in your world?
Com. It's very easy. Everything's on the website, links to my socials. Instagram is kind of my jam, honestly. So you'll find me more on there than the others, but I am ever present everywhere. And yeah, on the website that you'll see my memoir trilogy. It's available on Amazon, Kindle, Audible, all the different formats. And yeah, and my courses are on there too. If anybody is interested in the neuroscience, and there's three different levels, all levels of affordability, depending how intense and, how much effort and information you want. But even on a very basic level, there's one that's under $50 that just gives you kind of a rundown. And I look at life like a car. Get back in the driver's seat, take control. But I call it going through the 5 gears with you, going through your mind and how your mind works through those 5 gears to just kind of get you started back to where you want to go, get back on track. So definitely come find me on the website, message me on socials, follow me, all the things. And just share this episode too. If anybody is listening and thinks that somebody they know might benefit from this information, because I'm telling you, the subconscious stuff is the key to healing and overcoming these ideas about yourself that led you into these relationships in the first place.
Absolutely. Oh, Dana, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, for sharing all the information. We, of course, will make sure you have all that information in the show notes. We'll make it super easy for you to connect with Dana, get on her website, check out her books. I know where you can even actually sign up to take a reading of part of one of the books before you even purchase
Yes.
it, which I love. So, so again, we'll make sure we have all that information in the show notes. Dana, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Yes. And in case this sparked something for anyone that is listening, you're like, oh, I keep hearing the subconscious thing. Do me a favor and just take a look. Go down the rabbit hole for a good like 30 minutes and just see the possibility, because that really is where it started, I believe, for both of us. It was just the possibility. Starting there, taking a look, seeing what might technically, right, be there or not. But it is amazing once you start looking at it, the world that it opens you up to. And there is where you can start making those tiny steps to start rebuilding in a direction that is more for you and not for everybody else, right? So thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, do one thing positive for someone each and every day and see the difference that it makes in your life. Catch you later. Thank you so much for tuning in to Real Chat with Kat today, where real stories meet real solutions. If you love today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review on Apple, and share this with someone who may also need to hear this as well. Let's also keep the conversation going. Follow me on socials at The Lotus Effect, connect with our incredible guests, and remember, you are never alone. Your story matters, and you have the ability and the power to rewrite it. You always have a choice. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and keep showing up as the incredible, unstoppable